So the entire theme of this session today is really how do we take the incredible hard work that we're all doing in understanding risk and make sure that is turning into effective, tangible action to make people safer. So we have a series of 4 presentations, and they're going to increase in technical complexity as we go through the day. So our very first speaker is Mr. Abdullah Mutafi, who is from the Reconstruction Fund for Hadramaut and Al-Mahar. Now, Mr. Mutafi will also have a translator, and this is an interesting story. Noha Khalifa, I hope that's correct, is from the Cairo-based Regional Centre for Disaster Risk Reduction. And there's a strong link between Yemen, which is where the reconstruction process is happening, and the RCDRR, which is trying to build the capacity of the government of Yemen and help it be able to manage the data sets that will help inform its reconstruction processes, and more importantly, help it really to take some steps to mitigate disasters before they occur. So without any further ado, I'll ask our first speaker, Mr. Abdullah Mutafi, to please come up, and Noah, if you would too.
Hello, I will just go first through the agenda. So first we have the natural hazard and risk in Yemen, and then we are going to show a short clip on 2008 flood disaster, why cyclone became a disaster, successful experience of the Reconstruction Fund, and Yemen probabilistic multi-hazard risk assessment, and then the next step for the government and concluding points. Okay, you go first.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الجمهورية اليمنية عدد سكانها يبلغ أكثر من 22 مليون نسمة، وطبيعتها الجغرافية صعبة جدا، جبال، سهول، أودية، هضاب، الذي يجعل من اليمن عرضة للتصحر والجفاف وموجات من الفيضانات، وبالتالي عرضة للكوارث. ففي خلال العقدين الماضيين شهدت اليمن كوارث كثيرة بمعدل كارثة كل عام. بلغت متوسط الخسائر السنوية تقريبا حوالي 70 مليون دولار أمريكي سنويا. إن فيضانات السيول في أكثر الكوارث الطبيعية تكرارا في اليمن هي الانهيارات الصخرية، وعلى وجه الخصوص الفيضانات والسيول، والتي تكررت خلال عام 1996 وعام 2000 وعام 2008. إلا أن الأكثر تدبيرا وخطورة كانت تدفق السيول من جميع فروع السيول الأودية في وادي حضرموت في وقت واحد، أمطار استمرت أكثر من 35 ساعة متواصلة بغزارة بلغت كمية المياه حوالي 2 بليون متر مكعب من المياه، بلغ ارتفاعها حوالي 15 متر، وتكاليف خسائرها بلغت 1.6 بليون دولار أمريكي، أي ما يعادل 6% من إجمالي الناتج المحلي، وارتفعت نسبة الفقر في المنطقة من 28% إلى 50%، ونتيجة ذلك انخفض الناتج المحلي 15%.
So I'll translate this. So the Republic of Yemen, with a population of almost 22 million, and a topography of rugged mountains, highlands, deserts, and coastal plains, coupled with arid weather condition, which makes Yemen highly vulnerable to desertification and floods, and make it a country that experiences at least one disaster each year, with a total with an average annual loss of $70 million. Floods are the most recurrent natural disaster in Yemen, and followed by landslide and earthquake. And the most recent major floods occurred in 1996, 2000, and lastly in 2008. The 2008 flood in Hadramaut and Al-Mahar region alone costed around $1.6 billion, and which is equivalent to almost 6% of the country's GDP. For a country like Yemen from the developing world, with an estimated per capita GDP of almost $870 and limited financial resources, Yemen cannot really afford the losses and the devastating consequences from recurrent disasters. So now we're going to show a short clip about the disaster, the flood event of 2008, and the consequences of it.
On Thursday, the 24th of October 2008, the governorates of Hadramaut and Al-Mahra in the Republic of Yemen were hit by a tropical storm. For 35 hours, there was continuous torrential rain. The mountains and ravines poured with water. The torrents surged and the valleys flooded. This tropical storm caused great destruction in many towns in these two areas and displaced thousands of victims. According to the report by the World Bank, the losses were as follows: the death of men and women, young and old. 3,679 buildings damaged. 3,221 houses completely destroyed. 1,223 huts destroyed in remote villages, the displacement of approximately 25,000 people. The destruction of 22,902 acres of farmland, more than 500 date palms uprooted and swept away. The death of over 58,500 sheep, goats, cows and camels. The destruction of some 309,103 beehives. Factors that were pivotal to the size of this disaster include more than 30 hours of heavy rain, the simultaneous flooding of all valleys in the area, changes to the course of floodwaters caused by the inundation of the valley floors by the mesquite tree, blocking the watercourses and leading to raised water levels in the valleys, the destruction of old water channels and dams, and ill-conceived building. The absence of raised stone foundations on mud brick buildings, failure to prepare mud brick buildings to face heavy and prolonged rains. A lack of early warning systems. The rehabilitation project in the governorates of Hadramaut and Al-Mahra began in 2008 by means of the decision to institute a fund, the decision to appoint an executive director, administrative board meetings, accounting and verification.
طبعا لاحظتوا من خلال الفيلم ان اسباب الكارثه بالتاكيد سببين. السبب الاول طبيعي بحكم ان الكارثه هذه كبيره جدا تحصل كل 300 عام، وقبل 300 عام قد حصل مثل هذه الكارثه لان الاوديه كلها سالت في وقت واحد. والسبب الاخر سبب بشري اللي هو الاهمال في ازاله الاشجار من بطون الاوديه والبناء العشوائي وغيرها من الاشياء التي تهملها كثير من الحكومات العالم الثالث للاسف الشديد. ونتحدث نبدا بسيطه عن انشاء الصندوق. انشا الصندوق في نهايه ديسمبر 2008 من قبل رئيس الجمهوريه بتمويل من قبل الدول المانحة في دول الخليج العربي، وأيضا من قبل البنك الدولي وجهات أخرى. وطبعا الصندوق استطاع أن يحقق نجاحات كبيرة جدا خلال فترة قصيرة جدا. استطاع أن ينفق أكثر من 150 مليون دولار وينجز بها أكثر من 7000 مسكن، 5000 منها ترميم و2000 منها بناء متكامل بالإضافة للزراعة. النسبة التشغيلية حصلت خلال هذه الفترة لا تتعدى 2% فقط خلال فترة عامين، ولكن نتيجة الأزمة السياسية اللي حصلت تأخرت كثير من المهام.
So, as we can see from the slides, the key reason behind the flood getting into disaster. First, it's an extreme event. Yes, there were other historical similar events that happened 300 years ago, but there weren't any kind of study on flood hazard or flood risk analysis or assessment that they can benefit from. Secondly, it's a failure in applying strict regulation in prohibiting the building or the construction in floodplains, and the lack of maintenance of the detours of flood courses, and of course, as you can see from the video, the inexistence of early warning system. To continue on the reasons behind the disaster, also the inexistence of proper protection for the mud houses, such as roof insulation and protective layers of gypsum. The muscat trees. So this is an interesting story because the muscat trees are local trees that grow in Yemen, normally grow in desert. But what happened, and thanks to the sheep, they transferred the seeds of these trees from the desert to the wadi or to the valley, which completely plugged the flow of water during the flood and caused an inundation level of 15 meters. It's also because of these trees have a very long and deep roots extend to 30 meters below the ground level. It's completely blocked the penetration into the soil and blocked the water from flowing. The Reconstruction Fund for Hadramaut and Al Mahra Fund and its great work. So the fund, I just want to emphasize that the fund is a governmental entity that was established through a presidential decree in December 2008. The fund successfully managed to compensate the affected inhabitants and was able to do it in a record time according to the report of the delegation of the World Bank. With a budget or almost 200 million US dollar spent from March 2009, almost spending 75% of this budget, which is equal to 150 million till now. But this is because of the Arab Spring and the political transitional stage that the country was going through. They weren't able to, it slowed down the work and they weren't able to continue their work.
أيضا من ضمن التعاون الجهات الأخرى مع اليمن، قامت شركة RMSI بعمل دراسة للحد من المخاطر باستخدام جميع البيانات التاريخية والمتاحة بتمويل من المرفق العالمي للحد من مخاطر الكوارث والانتعاش وتقييم المخاطر في اليمن التي تضمنت المهام التالية: 1. تحليل احتمالات المخاطر التاريخية، قاعدة بيانات للتعرض للمخاطر، تحليل مستوى الخسائر المحتملة، وضع خرائط لمخاطر الكوارث، تقييم المخاطر المحتملة في حضرموت المهرة، وضع معايير الفيضانات لتصميم القدرة الإنشائية لمقاومة الفيضانات، وضع دراسة جدوى اقتصادية تخفيف آثار الفيضانات من خلال بدائل إدارة مياه السيول في حضرموت والمهرة. وقد انتهت مؤخرا الشركة من دراساتها بالتعاون بين الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية واليمن، وقد واجهت صعوبات في جمع البيانات. ولكي تترجم هذه الدراسة على أرض الواقع للحد من المخاطر في اليمن بحاجة إلى الدعم، بحاجة إلى قاعدة بيانات وخرائط تفصيلية، بحاجة إلى إعداد وتدريب الكادر المحلي لإدارة استخدام التقنية الحديثة لهذه الدراسات، إنشاء مرفق موحد لإدارة المخاطر في اليمن وبدعم من البنك الدولي. وقد أقر رئيس الجمهورية هذا المبدأ لإنشاء صندوق موحد لليمن بالتعاون مع البنك الدولي.
So, Yemen probabilistic multi-hazard risk assessment, that was done by RMSI study. It's a multi-hazard risk assessment study using mostly historical data, and the fact that the amount of data in this project is huge. So the project started in 2009 when the GFDRR funded a multi-hazard risk assessment in Yemen, which includes 6 main tasks. As you can see from the slides, we only have 5 and 6, so I'm just going to read the first task. So the first is the historical hazard identification and probabilistic analysis, and the second is the inventory of exposure and vulnerability. The third is the probabilistic loss modeling and city-level analysis. And the fourth is the SANA natural hazard risk maps and risk analysis software development. And the fifth is the Hadramaut and El Mahra probabilistic risk assessment, which established a flood-resistant design criteria for the infrastructure. And task 6, which is the feasibility study on flood mitigation through water management for Hadramaut and El Mahra governors. So all the studies were done by the Indian risk modeling company, RMSI, in collaboration with the US Geological Survey and the Yemen Geological Survey. We were consulted during this study so many times, but the data availability was a huge issue and a big challenge. Historical data and the hydrometeorological data was not easily accessible, as well as the data of critical infrastructure and building characteristic was not available as well. So we need the information and the maps out of this study, but we don't have any kind of capacity to use this data. We don't have GIS experts, which is Geographic Information System, and we know about the study, and now we want access. We want to access this study and get benefit from it. So hopefully that the World Bank is going to help in implementing this.
رؤية الصندوق في مواجهة الأخطار المحتملة لا سمح الله الفيضانات المستلهمة من تاريخنا القديم. إن رؤيتنا تتمثل في ضرورة السيطرة على سرعة تدفق السيول من خلال بناء المنشآت المهدئة لقوة تدفق السيول. من هذه الأمثلة الحية إنشاء مصدات وصهاريج كبيرة عند المحاذرات الشديدة بالقرب من المدن مثل صهاريج عدن وهي قديمة جدا. إنشاء قنوات كبيرة في المدن المهددة بالفيضانات عند مصبات السيول إلى البحر، مثل على ذلك خور المكلا وهي حديثة، حمت المكلا من كارثة 2008، وهذه من المهام التي تحد من المخاطر. بناء السدود والحواجز الكبيرة لحجز المياه لتمكن المياه الجوفية من التغذية، وأيضا التحكم في سير حركة السيول.
So government is going to take some measures learned from the historical practices and also modern practices, such as constructing large reservoirs at the acute large falls of great slopes, waterfall, to make sure to break the power of the water falling from these slopes. Make use of natural bays to build, to absorb the flood flow at the pouring end and to protect the cities around those bays. And thirdly is building massive dams to save some of the large quantities of fresh water into lakes with different size and different dimensions. And excess water should be allowed to continue coursing along the wadi or along the valley so that the dam may not result in drying the land. So to design and construct many of these measurements, more accurate study and better, of course, quality of data is needed. And funds from the GFDR and other countries is essential as well.
ختاما للوصول إلى هذه التدابير والحد من المخاطر يتطلب الكثير من الدعم في مجالات تمويل الدراسات والخبراء ورصد البيانات الدقيقة وإقامة المشاريع العملاقة على المدى الطويل بدعم الدول المانحة والبنك الدولي مثلا بالمرفق العالمي للحد من الكوارث.
Okay. So in conclusion, what is needed is funding for the government of Yemen to do the work, as well as transfers of some of technical DRM expertise and management skills. There are a lot of unique elements in Hadramaut and in Yemen in general, such as the problem with the Muscat tree and the unique mud building construction, the unique and the beautiful heritage building that are exposed to the risk of flooding and disaster. And so special studies are needed and assessment to be conducted about such unique characteristic of such a country. Therefore, the institution needs capacity building in using risk data and risk assessment output, design and implementing an early warning system, and using the GIS, Geographic Information System, to make the impact of these studies, of all these efforts, sustainable. So studies are great, but we need technical capacity to be able to use it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So what we're going to do for today's session is just take one question now, if there is one from the audience, and then try to have a panel discussion at the very end of all our talks. So we do have time to take one question if there is one from the audience. Otherwise, I get to ask it. So the question I would ask is, does the government of Yemen actually have, in terms of, there's a need for capacity and obviously World Bank funds, but in addition, the political will, the desire to actually implement change, some of the things around the safer infrastructure, better dams, has that already been taken on? The government wants to do that and capacity is the only issue?
طبعا الحكومة مهتمة بهذا الموضوع، وكما سبق قبل حوالي شهر من زمان أصدر الأخ رئيس الجمهورية توجيهاته إلى الحكومة بإنشاء صندوق موحد للحد من الكوارث في اليمن بالتنسيق والتعاون مع البنك الدولي وأصدقاء اليمن. أنتم تعرفون أن اليمن تمر بأزمة سياسية، والعالم بأكمله يدعم اليمن في الخروج من هذه الأزمة.
Okay, so basically, yes, the government is open for implementing DRR measures, and actually we got a permission from the Minister of Urban Planning to build a platform specifically for Yemen for open data and use the risk analysis and risk assessment data from the output of the project of RMSI, but still we need the, at Yemen we need the fund and the support of the World Bank, FDR and donors.
Okay. We might save it for the panel discussion, just so we can have some time with everyone, if that's okay.
Okay,
So
thank you.
For another round of applause for Abdullah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Do you want to go so we can translate for the panel discussion? Oh no, I mean for the panel discussion later. So can you? So our second speaker today is from the is Dr. Agus Wibowo. We're very lucky. Agus represents a different perspective in that he is the head of the data centre within the Indonesian Disaster Management Agency. And so what Agus is going to take us through today is a sense of some of the ways that the Disaster Management Agency in Indonesia, some of the tools and approaches they are taking to really get a better understanding of disaster impacts and to help build the capacity of their district and provincial disaster management agencies to actually do something about those risks. So again, with no further ado, I'll ask Dr. Wibowo to please come up.
Assalamualaikum. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I would like to present about the Indonesian scenario assessment for emergencies. We call it stand for INASIF. As you know that Indonesia is, we live with the rich country, but we also rich of a disaster. As you see here that Indonesia people, as you see here, based on our calculation, population census of 2010, that there are many people exposed to disaster like landslide. So we have a lot of disaster in Indonesia, without like landslide, earthquake, drought, typhoon. This is small, we call it not typhoon actually. This is something like strong wind, not so big actually. Usually just destroy like 10 houses or several houses, something like this. Also flood, forest fire, tsunami, and also volcano eruption. So you see here we have a lot of island, and we have a rich country, but also we have a lot of disaster here. Okay. So how about the disaster in Indonesia? As we see, this is based on our data. We have a long record of the disaster data based on this inventory database. That the trend is that disaster will continue to increase, like include the intensity, frequency, magnitude, and also its spread. The environmental damage also increase, like hydrometeorological disaster. So you see here that the mostly disaster in Indonesia is 70% is hydrometeorological related disaster like flood, landslide, cyclone or typhoon, then droughts and tidal wave. So you see here that we have a lot of increasing. You see at 2002 until 2011 that will increase. I think in the future also will be increased. I think will be increased also. So this is our organization. We call it National Agency for Disaster Management, or in Indonesia we call it BNPB. This is the BNPB is a non-ministerial institution operating at minister level and directly responsible to the President of Republic of Indonesia. So we have three main functions like coordination, command, and also execute. So under the chief of BNPB, so this organization is report directly to the President. So under the chief of BNPB, we have two types of organization like advisory board. This is from expert and some political people also. And we have also some operational office, like BNPB office consists of professional and expert also here. So in the province level, we have also, we call it BBBD. This is a province level disaster management. We have, this number is 33, same as the province number. So we have 33 district disaster management office in Indonesia. And under the province, we have also the district BBBD, or we call it BBBD at level as district or municipality level. So this is, we have around 400 districts. That's why we now establishing around 350 BBBD in Indonesia. So this is a challenge also, how to provide the data, how to provide all the information to all the BBBD and also early warning system, etc. So to support all the function of the office, so we developing a website. This is, we call it the geospatial information. This is the address, www.bnpb.go.id. So we provide all the geospatial information to public for BBBD and also for public user. So every people can access our data. This is spatial data. Like we provide like this map. This is, we have Indonesian topographic map of scale 250,000, 150,000 also, and also 1 to 25,000 topographic map. So everybody can use it. We share it to internet using map services. So we provide also disaster map, like hazard map, like for all type of disaster. So we have 13 type of disaster according to law in Indonesia, disaster law. That like we have the hazard map like earthquake, tsunami, flood, landslide. Like also we have vulnerability maps, map capacity, and also risk map. So we divide into type of data here. First, the base map data, and we have also the thematic map. This type of disaster map, we call it thematic map. So we provide also disaster monitoring. So we have office, we call it the emergency operating center. So this is operating for 24 hours, 7 days. So we provide collecting all data through all the BPPD office. We usually in the morning, in the evening, we collect all information and input to the web server, and everybody can see the display of the current state of the disaster whole Indonesia. So this is a BNPB map service. So BNPB provides base map and thematic map services for public. These services can be used for map making or analysis using desktop GIS like Quantum GIS, or like INASIF. We will talking about INASIF. Also ArcGIS and other desktop software. So we can use it also for as input in online GIS like arcgis.com. We can use it also, and in Pakosur Tunnel, Pak Dodi already talked this morning about the geoportal, Pakosur Tunnel or big geoportal, so they can use also this data. So like this is the two type of map services. We have a base map, this is the address, and also we have a thematic map also. So the system may be developing using ArcGIS Server Enterprise. So we, okay, wait. So another office also like, or not only the BPNP, they provide the map services like Pakosur Tunnel, also provide the service like Public Work, also provide the map service, Ministry of Health, Minister of Forestry or something, all the Indonesian agency also providing some map services. The other source of data, we have also participatory mapping like OpenStreetMap. This is OSM, that the map is free map entire world, or easy download as a PSC file done by the contributor and validator, can be used as data source for INASIF. So in here we have two type of source of data. This is the published by the government offices like BNPB, Pakosur Tunnel, and other offices. And we have also a source of map from, this is a participatory mapping like OSM here. So based on this, that we have an idea to developing, to combine this type of map and produce some tool for disaster management purposes. Sorry. So that come to tool, new tool, we call it INASIF, Indonesian Scenario Assessment for Emergencies. So the idea is to get the best available science and data to bear on disaster management decision. So also make it easy to generate realistic disaster scenario for use in contingency planning, and also provide evidence-based and quantitative impact assessment. So this is, we're developing the INASIF based on Quantum GIS. This is a free and open source software, GIS software. So everybody can download the Quantum GIS and use it. So the Quantum GIS also provide all collection of GIS procedure for impact analysis. And we just keyword the system identify input layer and automatically select the right impact function. So easy to use, and the systems can be extend. So this is we can depend on us, we can extend, or we can automate or program or something like that. So this is a concept, the simple concept, that we have the hazard map and we have also the exposure. Then we can combine together and develop some new map. Yeah, so we have hazard map. The map is already provided by other agencies, also from BNPB and some other agencies. So earthquake, ground shaking, Indonesian map, etc. from science agencies, also from BNPB. So they are available online or offline. So also we have also exposure data like population densities. We have land scan, or we have from BNPB, we have the newest data based on the population census 2010. Also, we have some local data like OpenStreetMap. So we have combined together and develop some impact map. This is a sample of the output of the INASAFE. So let's say we are trying to modeling like in the event of flood in Jakarta, like in 2007, how many people might need to be evacuated or something like that. So we just select so we have some load the data here. It just like input and select the data, like hazard map, and select the exposure, then run, then the system will automatically compute how many people will be impacted, how many buildings will be impacted, also how many assistance we needed, like how many tent we needed, how many rice or how many other supply we needed. So they will automatically compute and display produce. They produce automatically map, and they produce also description of the map, something like population, building, etc. So this is a building, and we call it RW. This is the smallest unit, administration unit in mostly in Java, that impacted by the flood in 2007. So we can select this thing. Okay. So this is some sample of earthquake also. Same thing. So we have also automatic real-time impact assessment also here. So this is they produce a SEC map from the Bureau of Meteorological, something like that. So they will send automatically to BNPB. They will compute and publish automatically in our website. So the challenging is hazard and exposure data must exist and available to disaster. I think all the data is already there. Format, metadata, and distribution method must be standardized. And initiative like OpenStreetMap can be helpful for this systematic development. So this is some just overview that we are preparing for expecting the big earthquake in Padang, Mentawai. So this is some tsunami also, Sultan of Java. And this is we are developing like a shelter, vertical shelter for escape building or something like that. So in the closing, that the extent of the disaster-prone region of Indonesia with certain type of disaster require geospatial and tools such as INASAFE to process it and quickly, effectively, and efficiently. So BNPB still require cooperation with various parties to provide analysis, geospatial, and remote sensing data information and quickly, effectively, and efficiently. So last but not least, end-to-end in disaster response is from person to person that will result in resilient disaster communities. So all the description will be available on this flyer. You can find this flyer. This is about the INASAFE description, or you can download the system. And here, and that's it. Okay, thank you very much.
So again, we'll repeat. If the audience has one question, I'm willing to take. Else I'll take the right again. No? So, Agus, can I ask, on your last slide, you mentioned that in response, more resilient communities will come from person to person. Can you talk about the challenges of communicating some of this data down to your district disaster managers that are very, very new? How are you finding that, or do you expect that will be difficult? And what's important when you're communicating this information?
To the person, to the public.
Yeah, person to person, and to district disaster managers.
Yeah, usually we publish all the data in the website also, and we are experiencing a big earthquake just this year. 11 April 2012, we have a very big earthquake, but unfortunately there is no tsunami, so we are seeing. But based on this, so we will have use all the channel to distribute all information. So we will use like army network, we use police network, and we will use all the network to broadcast all information like warning information to the public. So the information will quick to the public, and also we will informing the public to like, you see we have developing also like OSM, OpenStreetMap. Yes. So that when people can contribute mapping their own village or their own area or something like that. So they can identify this building is danger, this area is danger or something like that. So they can make their own map or they can make also on their own, like risk map or hazard map or something like that. I think something like that.
Can I ask you all to join with me again in thank you? And while we're waiting for the technical people to come up, the URL for InnerSafe, oh, it was down the bottom. They're too quick for me. No, look, that's price I pay. I will just take the opportunity here to make two plugs. First of all, there is a session, I believe, directly after this session this afternoon on OpenStreetMap that will actually look at some of the examples of how you can, as Pak Agus put it, engage communities in actually owning these risks through participatory mapping. So I'd thoroughly, sorry, not on OpenStreetMap, on crowdsourcing is this afternoon's session. It'd be well worthwhile. Very linked, very closely linked to this idea of people owning and communicating risks. The second thing I'll just make a plug for those who are interested in the tools that Pak Agus showed, we have both a pamphlet for it here, but there's also training on Friday. So Friday there's a special training session around how to use the InnerSafe tools and to see whether or not they may be relevant and useful in other areas. So please, I'd encourage you all to sign up. I think we have about 10 spaces left, so first 10, first in. So I'd like to move straight on to our next speaker now. We're very, very lucky to have Michael Bonte here, or Bonte Grapaton rather, who was formerly from SOPAC, is now with the World Bank, who's going to take us through a comprehensive regional risk assessment that's been done for the Pacific and some examples of how that is actually being tangibly used to change decisions, policies and processes within the Pacific area. Over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. All right, so I think we're moving east within our presentations, and I'll take you now into the Pacific. I'd like to present on an initiative which actually started in 2007 out of a reason based on the Caribbean model to pool disaster risk in an insurance facility. And starting from that angle in terms of, is such a tool feasible in the Pacific? We started off in 2007 to do a feasibility study which actually concluded, there's not enough information actually available in the Pacific to properly price risk. So based on that, we actually extended the initiative and had a strong focus on gathering and understanding the risk of the Pacific. And we just finished the second phase of this initiative and moving now into the third phase. And just some of the highlights of the initiative as it stands now. It's for the very first time that we can actually put a face to risk in the Pacific. I mean, I started working in the Pacific about 10 years ago, and every disaster management plan in the Pacific 5 years ago reads the same. We are exposed to tropical cyclone, storm surge, and you name it. But no consideration how frequent these events happened, where do they happen, what kind of consequences we're actually facing. And now we do have concrete information, we do have facts and figures we can share with Ministry of Finances, with other stakeholders, and that changes the game. Overall, the Pacific just experienced on average, based on our analysis, just under 300 million. That might not seem much for some of your countries. But if you put that in relation to the regional GDP, we're talking about 1.7% of the regional GDP. And for countries like Vanuatu, these figures are going up to 6.6% annual averages. So these are enormous figures. And if you come up with these figures, you get the ear and the attention of the Ministry of Finance. And in another term, we're talking about, for Vanuatu, again, about 6% on average every year in terms of the contingent liability, in terms of emergency losses which the government might be expected to cover, of 6% of their government expenditures, which is an enormous amount to put into working and responding to disasters. For the very first time, we actually covered the entire Pacific Island countries, the entire landmass of all the Pacific Island countries. I think we invested heavily in creating a very large and comprehensive regional exposure database, which doesn't have to hide globally. And based on that, we developed and looked into the analysis of the fiscal risk of these countries, and based on that, trying to develop disaster risk financing solutions which are appropriate for these island countries. And the data and information is actually accessible at a trial version under that URL. Okay, in terms of what Trevor said, I mean, it's really about, we created this massive information about risk So how do we get that information to be used by decision makers and planners? So to get there, to understand risk, I mean, there's a lot of things we needed to look into. First, we had to understand our hazards. And you see here a series of maps just symbolizing these elements of the analysis. In principle, what we wanted to know is what is the exposure in terms of fatalities, injuries, how many people might be affected by disasters. What is the exposure in terms of monetary losses, both in terms of ground-up losses to buildings, infrastructure and crops, but as well in terms of emergency losses, in terms of what you have to do when you have to respond to a disaster, in terms of debris removal, medical supplies, etc., etc. So we wanted to know what it is these countries are up to. And to be able to do that, I mean, sort of we had to look into the hazards, had to look into creating the asset database or the risk exposure, what are the elements exposed, and then we're able to actually model risk. And you do see that at the very left of the slide for Papua New Guinea. And he expresses a really first of its kind for the Pacific real risk map, expressing risk as a average annual loss per normalized by asset value, which shows you then basically which are the districts here for PNG which are more prone to disasters. As a side product of being able to do that analysis, we actually created likely one, if not the largest, collection of geospatial data. Normalized, everything in the same, a common methodology, and again, a large resource which is available now to the countries and to the region. Just try to highlight, I don't want to bother you with the details, but I just try to highlight what we were able to do in the Pacific because of the small size of some of these countries. We invested heavily on getting the risk exposure database right, and spent quite a lot. And I'd like to acknowledge two of my former colleagues, I have to say, Susan Novosey and Amrit from SOPIC. We were quite heavily involved in that exercise. Just briefly, level 1 and level 2 means we physically went to 80,000 buildings and collected needed information on the building in terms of its structural characteristics, its use, the number of stories, etc., etc. And another 450,000 buildings being digitized from very high resolution imagery. So we have the exact area of that building, we know where it is, and we know what it's been used for. And these 500,000 odd buildings is about 15% of the whole building stock of the Pacific. But since it's being collected in the urban areas, it actually represents about 70% of the total asset value. So it's an enormous density of very high resolution information which we've been able to gather. And for some of the rural areas, then we had to use other tools, basically. In terms of perils, what did we look into? I mean, the two major predominant perils for the Pacific, which causes most of the losses, are tropical cyclone and earthquakes. And for tropical cyclone, we looked into the wind damage, damage from flooding, riverine flooding from precipitation, as well as coastal inundation from storm surge. And for earthquake, we looked into ground shaking, and we looked into tsunami, both from local sources as well as tele-tsunami. The hazard analysis is heavily based on the existing regional catalogues, which for earthquake gives us about 100 years of monitored data, and for tropical cyclones about 30, 40 odd data, years of data. And based on that, we were feeding that into a simulation engine and created about 10,000 realization of next year's tropical cyclone and seismic activity. So based on that statistic catalog, then we could probabilistically assess what the hazard is. What we did, I mean, in a way it was a marriage of convenience. We used local knowledge, both basically to have good and easy access to some of the information. I mean, some of these places are very remote, are very hard to get to. Some of these countries have only one flight a week. So very expensive, actually, to do data analysis. So it's good if you do have somebody who knows the places sometimes are small enough that you actually know, okay, that building is that and that. So we used local knowledge, but we worked through a regional organisation, SOPAC, which is actually the mandated organisation looking into disaster risk management for the region, engaged them quite heavily in the data collection, and we worked with national agencies in the data collection as well. And you see, it was a pretty hard job to get this information. It was indeed, actually, but and as well, this information is now hosted by SOPAC as a regional organisation, and a platform which has been developed in serving, I think, SOPAC's general geospatial data, not just the risk data. And talking about that tool, it's the Pacific GeoNode. You see here just an example. You can play around with it a little. It's still in a test phase, and we're still facing some challenges in terms of getting it all right. But nonetheless, there is information available. You can access it, and you can play around with it. You can zoom in via countries. For this instance, it's a tropical cyclone hazard map of a 100-year return period, and you see all these quite orangey red data, basically saying that Vanuatu does have a significant cyclone hazard risk, which on average you get these wind speeds. They have a chance of about 40% within 50 years to be exceeded. So, which gives us good information to build our infrastructure accordingly. And just zooming in on the capital, Port Vila, zooming in further, then we get the overlay with the asset data, and then we can actually look at a potential data point and get some of the assets on it. It's just some of the information which is available. We compiled everything in country risk profiles, just showing in a nutshell what the overall national exposure to risk is. And compiled that in a nice leaflet. And I understand we have some of these for some of the countries downstairs. So if you're interested, just run through it. It's a very brief and easy communication in terms of getting some of this information out there. Okay, hurry up. Okay, but the main thing is, how can we use that actually to really move towards application? And the things we're looking into, in the center you do have the Pacific Risk Information System, which is that huge tool with resources, etc. But based on that, we're building now applications, looking into macroeconomic planning, disaster risk financing, rapid disaster impact estimation, urban planning and infrastructure design, as well as general building the capacity and looking at climate change. You can't work in the Pacific without looking at climate change. Just in a nutshell, because I'm really running out of time. Again, we started off here. Disaster risk insurance, 2007, was the focus, was the driver. But now we're talking much more holistically about all levels of risks and appropriate tools for it. We're talking about working with Ministry of Finances in general to develop disaster risk financing strategies, to talk about in general how can we use this information at a macroeconomic planning context to have development more resilient and disaster and climate proofed. We try to further these tools to develop the private insurance market, and we're piloting now with 5 countries like a budget disaster risk insurance scheme for the next 2 years. Another thing which is very easy to have, you have all this information, and these island countries, they're partly they have very remote out islands, and they're getting the red card now. So it's very hard to get to. And in 2007, there was a tsunami in the Solomon Islands, and it took 4 weeks for them to understand how many buildings been damaged. 4 weeks lost before you actually start with any decent response and recovery issues. And within 72 hours, we can give an estimate just based on this information. And we as well piloting how can we use this information even before the disaster strikes, the tropical cyclone. How can we use whatever based on a track forecast, provide an impact forecast? I mean, these are some of the tools we are thinking of developing. And last but not least, working against with the Australian, who have heavily invested in climate change science, and now we try to merge the two and marry them and talk about what are really the impacts of or potential impacts of climate change to the Pacific. And I stop here before I get the red card.
Thank you very much, Michael. So I'll make the offer again. Is there anyone from the audience who'd like to ask a question of Michael? Yes, please, sir. Do we have a microphone?
I wanted to see more of the financing mechanism because I feel like the information you're giving, almost every country has its own unique set of information like that. And so I was looking forward to seeing how you're doing the financing because that would be the earth-breaking kind of event for disaster resiliency in most of, particularly in the developing countries. And as well as your country. So, could you throw some light on that?
I mean, the disaster risk financing was sort of the initial starting point as one of the strong applications we're developing further. As you do say, I mean, one of the things which we start looking into and what the Pacific looks into now, realizing the huge impact by disasters is to set, I mean, a lot of these countries do have already budget allocations, but normally they're within sort of budget contingencies within the existing budgets. And what's been realized, cyclone seasons is usually mid-term of the financial year. So if a cyclone happens at the wrong time, basically you don't have any contingent budget immediately available. But it's not just the financing aspects, it's not just the resource mobilization which plays a huge role. We do have as well sort of being able to execute your budget in time, having mechanisms in place to quickly mobilize resources, but as well to spend them for response. And these are certain things we've been looking into. We've been looking into with countries how to develop and how to scale, like extra budgetary trust funds. I mean, national trust funds, sort of where, basically funding can be set aside to respond, but as well, if there's any surplus, potentially use that to invest in DR options. And for the very high top risk layer, we're actually working with 5 countries to transfer some of their risk to the capital market. I'm not sure if that's answering it. It's just in a nutshell. And if you're really interested, I'm happy to put you in contact with one of my colleagues who's actually working on that.
So can I ask you all to join me again in thanking Mike? So we have one more presentation to go, and again, I want to just very quickly thank Selena Catan for very kindly being our mystery guest that brought you all along today. Selena is a seismologist from El Salvador, from the Ministry of the Environment and Natural Resources, and she's going to take us through a very detailed earthquake risk assessment and some of the ways that information is starting to be thought about in terms of influencing policy processes and protecting buildings in El Salvador. So please, Selena, thank you.
Hello. As you know, risk assessment is meant to provide tools for disaster risk reduction. And so what I'm planning to do in this presentation is to briefly take you to the process of the seismic risk assessment in El Salvador and how the results of the seismic risk assessment as well as the individual results of each component can be used to provide decision-making tools for risk reduction. First of all, I'd like to express what the ground motion at the site is dependent on the source, seismogenic characteristics, and the attenuation of intensity, and the amplitude and frequency content modification due to the local site conditions. For this project, we had the advantage that hazard assessment project had just finished, so a lot of the basic information was taken from that project. But for the site effects, we had basically no information, so we had to come up with what we called a microsonation proxy. Okay, the definition and the characterization of the seismic sources as well as the seismicity parameters was taken for the project RESIST-2, and we only focused on choosing the attenuation models that best suited the conditions. Here we can see the seismic hazard map of El Salvador, and we can see how the highest hazard is located along the volcanic chain where the main city is located. This hazard can also be expressed as a series of earthquake scenarios which are associated to a probability of occurrence. Okay, so now just to show how the predicted ground motions and the expected ground motions, a comparison between them, and we got a very good fit. But for this time, the seismic hazard does not take into account the side effects, and we had to include them. And the first step was to analyze how important these effects were. And the metropolitan region is underlain by volcanic ash deposits, ranging from 3 to almost 60 meters right on, beneath the city. And here on the right side, you can see, well, this is spectral accelerations, but for what you need to see is the red line, which is the code existing at that time, and it's giving us the accelerations to which the buildings should be designed. And the gray lines are the actually measured response spectra. So we could see an overdemand mainly in the 0.2 to 0.8 period range, thus affecting a lot of mid-rise structures. Okay, this is the microzonation proxy that we came up with, basically dividing the metropolitan region into 5 different zones, each of them with its particular amplification function, defined in terms of amplification of spectral accelerations for different structural periods. And here we have a comparison between 2 zones. In yellow, we have the zone 1, which is affecting mainly 2-story height buildings. And in the red zone, going towards Lake Ilopango, we have the higher depth of deposits, and thus the soil conditions are affecting mainly high-rise structures. And we can see these results alone can help with the decision-making on land use planning. Okay, so what do we do for the risk assessment? We take now the scenario associated to a probability of occurrence. We calculate the spectral, the ground motions, but then we have to increase these ground motions due to the side effects. Okay, then for the exposure data gathering, at first step, we chose the portfolios of education, public health, and governmental institutions. And for the governmental and public health institutions, we basically surveyed them all. But for the educational portfolio, we could only choose a sample of 20% because there were too many institutions in the metropolitan region. These 257 institutions resulted in about 1,500 buildings. And for all these buildings were surveyed to gather the basic information data, such as population, replacement cost, geographic location, and the use, but also to examine the main vulnerability factors related to the structure's capacity to resist earthquake loads, such as the structural system, the level of earthquake resistant design, which we define in terms of the construction year and the different codes, and the fundamental period of the building defined in terms of the building height. And we also tried to gather information about secondary vulnerability factors, such as damage during previous events and structural deficiencies. That I will show you this short column effect and how it has affected during past earthquakes. We have the torsional irregularity, soft and weak story effect, and these flat slab and flat plate structures, which are really critical and we actually found during the survey. All this information was put in this system that allowed for the consultation and filtering of the information, and also for each of individual buildings, a PDF could be displayed with all the information gathered in the field, and as well as the photograph and the location. Okay, and what we found was a lack of planning and a haphazard growth of the city. We knew that it had happened, that it is happening, but it was evidenced during the survey. At the right, we have a plan of one of the health institutions that was one institution with 71 buildings, 59 of which were different structural systems. We have also these precarious systems that are very critical. And here at the right, the last building, you can maybe not see it yet, but it shows also a result of this haphazard growth, which is a mixture of construction materials with different earthquake resistance capacities. For example, we have in the first level basically a concrete frame with integrated masonry walls, but in the second floor, maybe they ran out of money for the masonry walls, and we have these steel panels. So thus, converting this into a flexible floor. But then they continue with masonry walls, and at the top, they ran out of money again, and they continue with this steel structure. So it's a mixture of everything, and it will result in a disaster. And I was pleased to see that this came up as one of the most with the highest risk buildings. So something's right with our model. Okay, now for the vulnerability assessment, we used existing vulnerability curves and other methodologies such as the HASUS. We tried to construct some analytical models where we could, because it was very difficult to get detailed data for that. We also used some experimental data from the universities, and we finally defined the vulnerability curves. And then these curves we try to calibrate with the observed damage, comparing the spectral alterations at specific sites and the damage for different building types. And for the probabilistic risk assessment, considering the contribution of these 25,000 different earthquake scenarios, we obtained analyzed loss of about 5.78% of the total exposed volume, which is very high. Here we have the results of the probabilistic modeling, the annualized loss in terms of the exposed amount, percentage of the exposed amount, I'm sorry, and also in terms of thousands of US dollars. We can see that the results, the highest losses are concentrated in a small amount of buildings, which allows us to prioritize the critical infrastructure. Okay, so now how do we move from risk assessment to risk management? How do we use these risk assessment results to provide decision-making tools for risk reduction, including both disaster prevention and disaster preparedness? First, we are here. We have the risk assessment, and we have identified the critical infrastructure. But we still, this information was gotten by using some approximations and generalized vulnerability curves for the building types. So we need to do now detailed analysis to determine possible reinforcing and retrofitting measures, to then get the funding also to get the corrective measures. But the individual results alone, such as the hazard and site condition, the construction practices, and the vulnerability of the different building types can lead to improvement of the building codes and the land use plans. Maybe we need also for that some detailed investigations, such as the microzonation of San Salvador. But the risk and individual components can also be used for emergency preparedness and response. We had some examples already about the risk scenarios, how we can get them into response plans. Maybe with the infrastructure we have not analyzed the whole city, but still we can have some buildings that can be like red flags in times of an emergency where help should be directed to. But also the analysis of the attenuation and the side effects can be used to construct shake maps, which we are planning to do right now, and sometimes, hopefully, real-time damage and loss estimations. Okay, this is just to give you some idea. The project just finished a couple of months ago, so we are now taking only the first steps. We still have funding needs, so I'm going to put El Salvador right there under Yemen in the World Bank funding waiting list. But we are trying to move along. We have now started a project with JICA to improve the seismic monitoring network that we hope to have by the beginnings of 2014. We have an ongoing side effect investigation. We are also working on a proxy for the evaluation of the side effects at a national level, and building the strong motion database to calibrate also our predictions with the actual recorded data. For the future work, we would like to complete the seismic risk assessment for the remaining educational system. We have the problem-related project and is there on the Ministry of Governance in El Salvador, also trying to get fundings. We would like to have the risk assessment for the major city and the instrumentation of important building types. We have now instrumented only the Ministry of the Environment, But it's actually very critical because it's a building that has to respond has to be able, the people have to be able to work in time of an emergency. And we wish to continue with the microzonation of the metropolitan region. As for the seismic risk reduction, corrective and prospective measures, we have now worked on a catalog of critical infrastructure for the main portfolios, mainly educational and public health. And we have this information, but it's also very difficult to give them just a problem without the solution. So we would like also we are helping them. We have generated an investment plan and are trying to help them get the fundings also for that. And this also the results for the hazard assessment, as I mentioned, can be used for land use planning and the seismic code revision and update. But right now, the results that we have gotten in the project were presented to the involved agencies, mainly to the Ministry of Public Works, with the charge of the code revision and the organization of that takes care of the land use planning, and are now not going to get into the codes or in the land use plans, but are being used as guidelines to give construction permits and to give environmental permits, and so it's an advance. And also the public awareness program, we have a whole agenda of the presentation of these results and the structural reinforcement for the critical infrastructure. Yes. As for the emergency response, we are updating the Seismic Monitoring Center with new software for seismic data acquisition, exchange, and processing. Also the improvement of the seismic monitoring network, now that we have identified the information gaps and also the different zones with different site conditions. We have, in this project of JICA, we are requesting strong motion equipment that can get us the data in real time so we can have shake maps, which we are also working on right now. We would like to have response plans for specific scenarios, but we would like to have the information for the whole city, and sometime in the mid-future, hopefully, near real-time damage and loss estimations. Okay, and that would be it. Thank you.
That's great. So again, opportunity for one question from the audience. Yes, please, sir. And do we want to just take? Yeah, thanks.
My question is, as a mitigation measure, we conduct risk-sensitive land use planning. But for that land use planning, we need to have, to study the urban growth pattern also, because apart from this risk modeling, we have to know about the growth modeling also. Have you ever tried to intermix those two tools altogether, the growth modeling pattern at the same time the risk modeling pattern, so that, more of a rational approach to land use planning could be achieved?
Okay.
Thank you.
Right now, the microzonation proxy that we worked on, which is the main tool for the land use planning, we only did it for the urban area of San Salvador because we didn't have a lot of data for outside the city. But now, with this project also from JICA, we are trying to place this strong motion network also in where the city is planned to grow, so that we can get data for that and we can start the land use planning and prevent maybe the construction of buildings that can be in resonance with the soil response in that areas.
Just wanted to know whether you have conducted the different growth scenarios altogether while assessing the risk model.
Sorry?
Different urban growth scenarios. Have you taken that before considering for the risk model?
No, right now we have not. Good idea.
So we have a small opportunity now actually to engage directly with our panellists. If there are specific topics, questions, either for individual panellists or an issue that you think you'd like to raise and get a perspective on, now is an opportunity to ask those questions. Oh yes, up the back. Sorry, can we just take the microphone to you?
I'm Piyush. I work for the World Bank in India. So my question actually comes from the presentation on Yemen, but it's not restricted to, it's actually open to any speaker who would like to take it up. There is a lot of cultural heritage and natural heritage that's at risk. And we've seen a lot of presentations that are talking about the value that you give to the buildings and the kind of damage that they are likely to cause. So I haven't seen so much work here which looks at heritage buildings or areas of natural heritage, whether they are in the vicinity of urban areas or otherwise. And how would you actually give value to these buildings, because they would not come into the conventional parameters of value. And hence, what would be the importance in taking special measures, because they often require slightly different measures than what we are suggesting for a normal scenario.
شكرا. طبعا بالنسبه للتقييم الذي تم بخصوص جمع البيانات للمخاطر تم بمشاركه السلطات المحليه، وايضا شارك البنك الدولي في اخذ بيانات ورفع تقرير عن هذه الانهيارات اللي تمت سواء في المباني او في البنيه التحتيه او في الثروه السمكيه وغيرها. ومن خلال هذه البيانات جميعا تمت اخذ قاعده بيانات كامله تم العمل بموجبها في عمليه اعاده الاعمار. فيما يخص موضوع المباني الطينيه، المباني الطينيه تعتبر مباني تاريخيه في اليمن عمرها اكثر من 800 عام، وهي مدينه شبام التاريخيه. وجميع مباني المنطقة نتيجة لكونها واقع في وادي ودرجة الحرارة مرتفعة فيها، فالمباني الطينية هي المناسبة لهذا النوع من الكليمت أو الطقس، فلا يصلح لها غير العمل الطيني، وهي قادرة على الصمود أكثر من المباني الخرسانية والحجرية، ولكن هي بحاجة إلى الحماية من الأساسات وأيضا للجدران بواسطة التلبيس بمادة النورة. وطبعا يشارك البنك الدولي معنا في مثل هذا التقييم، وبالذات حماية المباني الأثرية. لدينا مباني أثرية وحيدة في العالم كله يجب الحفاظ عليها، وهي مباني معمارية عظيمة جدا ومبنية من الطين. أكبر مبنى في العالم من الطين موجود في سيئون في حضرموت.
Okay, so basically there were a damage assessment that had been done just after the disaster. Two committees were established, one on the local level by the government of Yemen, and a second one on the international level by the World Bank. And they estimated the amount of loss that happened to the building and to the construction, and used it for the planning and reconstruction stage. For the heritage buildings and to protect those, actually there were no available studies that actually assist or analyze the risk that such a building, such a heritage are prone to. So hopefully we hope for a fund and the studies that would be specific about the heritage building and how to protect them and reduce reduce their risk that they are prone to.
Yes, Sir Sujas.
Thank you. Yeah, my question goes to World Bank. It's still about cost. We are looking at, let's say, the costs, say, after 50 years or 20 years. But have we looked on different scenarios? If we did interventions, what would it save what's the cost effect? Is it possible from the data available to get cost effectiveness of different approaches to the different hazards? It may not be available now, but is it possible to get it from the data?
And since the microphone is still here, I think we've done a lot of programs for universal health care, for example, in my country, in Ghana. And a lot of poor people are participating in this. And we also know that the vulnerability scale tilts heaviest on the poor people. So I was wondering, that's why I was so optimistic about your presentation on the financing, whether there is some kind of mechanism that is being developed or that is out there that we can all take a look at to see how we can provide insurance like FEMA has done for repetitive insurance for flood-prone areas in America and some other countries. Whether we have some kind, similar to universal health care for disaster resiliency and vulnerability, because I think that is when we will begin to address the issue of resiliency. Otherwise, I think we're just talking. Thank you.
Thank you. I think two very valid points or suggestions. To the first question first. Possible, yes. I mean, it's one of the things we haven't looked at yet, but that's particularly what we'd like to develop further in terms of what I said, applications in the kind of urban and infrastructure planning space, that we really look in terms of using the modeled data. Then you can basically decide, I mean, if you would, for instance, I mean, if for 1 or 2, I mean, we do now, just making it up, it's actually equal there. Let's go Solomon Islands. Solomon Islands, the predominant hazard is a seismic hazard. So we could actually look into what's the kind of, very simply, return in terms of running a retrofitting program for schools. What would be basically the benefits? I mean, it can be done. We haven't done it yet, and that's some of the things we would be looking into doing. To the second question, the epigraphy hasn't looked into that yet, because the focus was more on not an asset insurance, but an insurance scheme for national budgets. So it's a complete different approach, but I think it's a very valid point in terms of what you think. Can we look at, like, as you said, the US, in terms of our main response to flooding is we provide insurance and risk transfer. Are there some of the really tangible solutions we could be looking at? In principle, for the Pacific has very low insurance penetration in general in terms of both business as well as sort of public asset or private asset insurance. And I mean, I know for Fiji, I mean, we did post-flood surveys where we basically found less than 5 to 10% of the businesses actually being insured against flooding. And some of the places you're actually not being able to insure against flooding because either you wouldn't be able to afford, or in some of the places, and particularly in Fiji, the insurance don't provide flood policies because they have no means of pricing the risk, and they just know it is very costly for them, so they rather don't insure. What we hope on the back, I mean, although having said that the focus wasn't on asset insurance, we do hope that we, with the tools and the analysis we've done, that we can actually help the private sector to actually provide information and develop policies then for asset insurance as well. But thank you very much for your points. Thank you.
Great. Yes, there's a question. And then I'm going to take session chair privileges and ask one.
Thank you. Mami from Madagascar. My question is for the World Bank also. In order to improve what the government response, so we when you have many risk assessment results and also for the risk assessment with hazard and so on. And is it possible to know how much approximately the costs to need for the response and for the recovery for the one country when you know very well for example, in Madagascar, we have many cyclones, 3 or 4 every year, and floods sometimes. And because we need to know the budget for the response and recovery every year, and can prepare it. Because the insurance, I think it needs time to sensibilization and for implementation. That's why I think we can begin with the government fund.
I mean, what we do know from the analysis is basically in terms of recovery costs. I mean, we do know what the replacement costs would be, meaning what are the costs to put the structures back into place as they've been before. In terms of the response losses, the way we've done it in the Pacific, for the Pacific we actually didn't have any information on emergency losses, as we call it. So we calculated the emergency losses based on globally available information on emergency response costs following tropical cyclones and following earthquakes. So there's a bit of a level of uncertainty within that, and we basically calculated them based on as a percentage of the overall impact of the disaster. So, yeah, we do know roughly what might be needed by a government to respond in terms of what kind of costs would have been needed to be shouldered by the government, and it's actually what we've been looking into, because as part of the disaster risk financing solutions, actually, we try to provide immediate liquidity to some of these governments, that they can shoulder some of these costs.
So I'm conscious of time, and that I, as session chair, would like the right to ask a general question of our group. So I guess I'll ask this question. I'll ask you each to comment on, in turn, perhaps starting with you, Michael. We've all seen, if we're honest with ourselves, we have all seen examples of where risk assessments have been done that haven't translated into action. Whether it's because of lack of ownership of the government that needed to affect change, inappropriate resolution, lack of credibility, whatever the reason. I'm curious, to this group who have all got examples of risk assessments that have actually affected some form of change, or are in the process of reaching out and changing either how we do things or how we mitigate disasters, what do you see as the most important characteristics that allow you to go from an understanding of risk to decisions? What is it about either your project or a general comment that actually will allow an understanding of risk, or give an understanding of risk its best chance of actually affecting change and leading to better decisions? So Michael, are you happy to?
Go on. Could need a bit of thinking on that. But for me, the biggest game changer, as I see it, is basically really putting figures on the table. I mean, that's what I see when we talk with governments, is what changes their perception is, okay, these are the amounts we're actually dealing with. So, and if you talk to like the National Disaster Management Office, that's basically this kind of amount. What they can then, in the internal budget discussion, basically put on the table, that's our liability, that's our exposure, and that's my budget, which is just really that tiny fraction of it. So, but as well, talking to the Ministry of Finance, in particular, I mean, Vanuatu was quite obvious, because Vanuatu is, in terms of relative exposure, I mean, likely one of the most exposed country globally, 6.6%. So for them, it's really, they do realise that they do have an issue, but they just didn't have the figures. So they do talk about creating mechanisms to basically be able to respond better, and having financial instruments available. It's just not the understanding of concrete what is needed. I mean, yeah. I mean, really, I think it's the figures, it is as well having the spatial resolution that you actually can use it for kind of more spatial type planning. I mean, the other thing, it is pretty young to really say, okay, this is the difference we made. I mean, the only success story we really had was sort of that more from the donor side, that basically, again, Vanuatu. Basically, one of the donors had, in terms of an infrastructure strengthening program, that they said, oh, that's really what Vanuatu is up to, okay. Maybe we put extra funding in to make the infrastructure stronger, and they did that. What they normally would have said, okay, that's additional financing for climate change, which we need in terms of climate proofing. So they said, no, in terms of best practice, giving the existing exposure, that's our response. Or others who do then actually use the information. We did have that as well, that sort of, again, more from a donor perspective, that project planning is now based on some of these tools. Oh, where should we focus our intervention? Oh, okay, we really see these are the areas which are much more exposed in that country. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, basically, to move from risk assessment to risk reduction, there is information needed, good information to serve as basics, and information that can be trusted by the stakeholders. Then you need true institutional commitment, because you have to go, like it was mentioned during the inaugural session yesterday, you basically have to go door to door spreading unhappiness and fear so that you can get funds. And it's a process that can take a long time, and you have to be patient. And then, well, there's the funding needed.
Yeah.
And this is the three things that can change a risk assessment project for being successful into translating into risk reduction, I think.
Fantastic. Agus?
Okay, thank you. I think the important thing is information, like for risk assessment, information to the community or public. So as I said that, I think everybody here is understand what is the risk of their own country, what is the disaster type will be happen or something like that. But about the community, about the people, so the information like risk, what will be happen in the location on the place is, I think, is important. So I think we have to educate the people, and we have to deliver all the information about the risk assessment to the public, so they understand what type of disaster will be happen at the place, so they can prepare and they can understand what will happen in the place or something like that. Thank you.
شكرا. تقييم المخاطر احنا اعتقد يجب نفهمها كشيء واقعي، يجب نتعامل معه باعتبارها ثابته ونأسس لها اداره مستمره ثابته، وهذا الذي مش موجود في اليمن ومش موجود في اماكن كثيره جدا. مثل الحروب لها وزاره الدفاع، لها مناورات مستمره، لذلك لماذا لا يكون هناك ايضا في موازنه ثابته لمواجهة مثل هذه الكوارث سواء وجدت أو لم توجد، لأنها أصبحت يعني واقع. إحنا اللي غافلين عنها فقط، أما هي تمشي بقانون، ربنا عملها تسير بقانون ثابت، إحنا اللي غايبين عنها. لذلك إحنا محتاجين لبعض أشياء سوف تذكرها الأخت نهى في الترجمة.
So basically, what we need is to understand risks through studies and building technical capacities and transfer of technical capacities and expertise, such as remote sensing and geographic information system, so we'll be able to understand risk and better use the output of the risk analysis. Secondly, we need to fill the gap in the data and build comprehensive databases, so the data would be available on not just the short term, on the long term, and training on data management and how to maintain and update these data to be used on the long term.
Wonderful. I guess I am conscious of time. There's a lot of people who have to stand and sit around the edges here. I'll need to take one last question and then we might wrap it up. So yes, I saw a very quick arm over to the left there. Please, there's a microphone.
Thank you very much. You see, I'm tempted to also ask this question. Hearing about the World Bank, I think maybe most of us we are thinking of money. The question that I would like to ask is that, is there a way where the continent or the world when experienced with the problem on disasters, where there is something like a criteria that one has to use in order to request money from World Bank? Thank you.
I should have made this clear at the start. I actually work for AusAid, so I'm happy to have a go at answering on behalf of the World Bank, but it's probably shouldn't be taken as too credible. I'm not sure if we have anyone in the audience who wants to comment on that. Possibly, there actually is a World Bank booth downstairs, and I think that's the sort of question, that understanding of how do we go through some of these details is well worth following up out of session. I mean, one comment I would make about that more generally is that we can think about how do we access dollars directly after a response, and that's a genuine, substantive question that we shouldn't shy away from. But I think we also have to recognise that events like this give us an opportunity to learn from each other in what we can do before that event. Now that equally relies on dollars, as we have heard today, my World Bank colleagues, but it also requires innovation. It requires new ideas and new approaches. And I think that's something that this event provides us, is an opportunity to share that amongst ourselves, to share those experiences and to start to learn what has worked in some areas and perhaps, if we're a bit honest, what hasn't worked and why. I'm actually going to end the session there. I just need to do two last bits of housekeeping before I let you all escape. Firstly, I just want to repeat my plug for both the the crowdsourcing session that is this afternoon. Also, sorry, Selena, your work was done using the CAPRA tools? Yes. Is that right? So I believe there's a CAPRA training session as well on Thursday. So anyone who's interested in using those technical earthquake risk assessment tools, there's a training session on Thursday that I assume there are still some seats available. And lastly, far more importantly, on Friday there's a training session for the use of the InnerSafe tools, as well as combined with some of the data sharing approaches of the GeoNode. So I'd strongly encourage you to register for that. Finally, I want to do two thank yous. I just want to quickly acknowledge Abby Bucker, who has done a huge amount of work behind the scenes helping us organise this today and identify our speakers. So thank you very much, Ab. And finally, I'd like you all to join with me in thanking our four fantastic speakers for their input, their time and their effort today.